to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we get to the approval of the minutes, I just had a couple of things I wanted to mention to everybody. I want to remind board members that I have 7 responses for our board evaluation. So there's a few stragglers out there. So, but I'm kind of happy with 7 responses. But there is a prize if we all complete it. I don't know what yet, but there will be a prize. A short meeting, maybe. The other thing I wanted to mention to you is, I know we've all been talking to people about the levy, and which is really good. I am glad to hear that. And it's nice to have the conversation, and I was talking to a couple board chairs from some of our partner districts, and they want to hear from us. They want to see us. They would like to meet with us, you know, just to coordinate levy requests. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to get out there and develop some relationships. So I know the high school trustees, I just gave you the list of board chairs. Some are changing with the election coming up, but it's the list of board chairs and when their meetings are. And I don't expect anybody, any trustee, to go to a meeting by themselves. If you want to bring a buddy along, bring a partner, I think that's a great way to do it. So we're gonna get that going. We've talked about it, and I know Will and I have gone to a couple meetings. Heather's going to some meetings. Jack always goes to meetings, lots of meetings. And the other thing I wanted to mention is there is a lot of training opportunities through MTSBA right now. I know I just listened to one today on hot topics on employment, which wasn't so applicable to board responsibilities. But they do have some really great ones that are free. There's a new trustee orientation on the 17th and the 31st of May, and those are good refreshers for all of us, too. The other one is the MTSBA annual meeting, and that is the 9th of June, and it is either in person or virtual, and it's from 1 to 4 on that day. And the really cool part about it is they will have a vote for the board leadership. And I have been nominated to become the vice president of the MTSBA board. So I would love to have everybody log in and vote.
Vote in favor.
And vote in favor, yes. And I am the only nominee. And then, yes, I hope. And then there is one on board leadership on the 10th of June, and that is virtual or in person on the 10th of June. And every Thursday, they have a think tank, and it's at noon, and they never go over an hour. And they have a topic that they discuss, the staff in their office, you know, and it's usually questions that have come in from trustees. So it's pretty, you know, informative to do that. And it's, like I said, they really honor your time. It's never longer than an hour. Sometimes they're 10 minutes, so it's pretty nice. But, back to the agenda. Approval of the minutes. I assume everybody has had a chance to look at the minutes from our last meeting. Are there any corrections? Comments? Care to make a motion?
Move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Mark. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Will. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next up, school updates. We have Edgerton, Jen Stein, and crew.
Yes, Melissa Mendel is a staff member who runs the school. And so we're gonna tell you, when we do a board update, to kind of tell you what happened in a school of 523 kids right now, 68 staff, like, over my time, and nobody wants that. But I just wanted to focus on one little area that I think is amazing. It's an area that Browning schools have come to visit, Columbia Falls has come to visit, and starting to get kind of some traction. And so I just want to share it in case it's not something you know about, because it's not something that's everywhere. So, we will begin. Alternative learning. Okay, so I'm not going to read this. I mean, can you read it to you? I don't mean to, great, but overall, because I just started like, I can't see it, and I don't know how you can do this, but what we believe, at Edgerton, you see our picture, that's the first thing you get is well signs by Micah Hill, because I'm not very good at lines, but it's kind of our belief that all kids belong and are loved at our school. And so kids that come to us in all different places and ways belong in our school. And how do we help all the kids? So at the bottom it says regulate, relate, and reason. And so we've done a lot of work with trauma-informed care and Safety New York that, if a kid is losing their mind, asking them why they did something is not going to be beneficial at the time. And we believe in that philosophy. So the ALC is used for kids that in the past may have had a meltdown in class, or may have been sent out to the hall, or sent to the principal's office, or sent home. And so we have this alternative learning center that is multifaceted, multi-purpose, run by a very amazing lady who can do all the things, kind of take care of kids. So I'll talk more about it as you just see a couple pictures, but I just wanted to kind of talk about why for your sake, I use an instructional person, and I've chosen to give that part up to have, and when we hired her, it was under like a behavior, sort of what she's getting into. And so that's how I fund it, and it is something that is staffed all day long. It starts at 8 a.m. for kids. If you've been on a playground of 500 kids before, it sometimes is overwhelming, or if you're little, and so some kids need that support right away, so they come in and they might eat breakfast there, they might play there, and it's also all the way up till buses pick you up. Sometimes our buses don't come till 3:58, and so you're outside for 28 minutes after a long day. That sometimes is dysregulated, and sometimes we end up behaviors we'd rather not use, and so we have this. So right now, this is used for all of these things. Busy breaks, quiet breaks. So it comes from, like you can see, these kids here, we have all this exercise equipment, so it ranges. So sometimes a teacher might send a kid to ALC unscheduled because the kid is losing their mind. And we want to maintain their dignity, we want to re-engage them, and so they might go and take a break. And they can decide, sometimes they heart rate, we decide, what do you need? And so we have tents, we have swings, we have all the things in there. And sometimes you find a pattern of behavior like riding is hard for them. So every day before riding, they go up there and they ride the bike for 10 minutes. So the most ready they can be to learn. And so those are kind of the different things. We've had kids that are homeless and don't get a lot of sleep, and there's a space. Very important to write the name of this, like the time that the child goes in, so you don't forget that they're there. That happens. So those are the reasons why. And one thing, just from a principal perspective, in the last 2 years, I've suspended 2 kids. That's a pretty astonishing number. And there are some times where kids get in the thing, and they do need to remove from class for a while. They, unhealthy, it's whatever it is, or the teacher sometimes just needs to be having a break. And so there is a way that we can maintain. Sending a 9-year-old kid home for behavior really isn't very helpful. The only time we send them home is really if there's an unsafe situation that we need to kind of regroup, come up with a safety plan for things. So it really helped a lot, and the reason it kind of started is I found that I was sort of stuck in my office all day because there's just this line of kids or information I didn't know about, or, you know, and there's a lot of loss. And so we decided if we had the sales feed, there's this person that's always there. So a teacher always has help. You don't have to wait in the office. There's always a place to go. And then Melissa goes through the restorative practices with them. Regulate, they talk about what they could have done, they talk about how they're going to restore things. And so when it comes to my job, a lot has been done for me. And so sometimes when you're kind of fast and you don't get to talk to the kids, really figure out what's going on at the bottom of this behavior, this allows that to happen. So it's just a small snippet, but that's a pretty awesome statistic as far as how many kids.
So one thing I really love about this, I love the concept of it. I get to be a support for the students, the teachers, counselors, in whatever way they need, and I really love that. I also get to teach, you know, the social emotional skills that then help the kids, or the students throughout the rest of their school day, and even out into the community. And so I love that. I see probably around 50 kids coming through my room every day. Some are, you know, repeat offenders, but that's a lot of kids. And so then, yeah, it ranges depending on why they need to be there. But a couple scenarios. One would be if a teacher is in the middle of a lesson or the student is starting their classwork and they get frustrated. That might come out in, you know, they slam their book on their desk or they become disrespectful. They're distracting the other kids around them, and the teacher recognizes that they might just need a break. So they come up to my room and they may spend 5 minutes swinging or in the rocking chair. Then they might spend another 5 minutes on the elliptical, and then they usually are calm enough that they can sit down and, you know, maybe with some one-on-one help complete the classwork that they need to do. So within a span of 15 minutes, the teacher and the class have had a break from those big emotions. The student has had to, you know, be in a safe place to express those big emotions, and they've also been able to complete the classwork. So they can go back to the class and hopefully have a successful day. The next scenario is if the student is struggling out on the playground, maybe they can't keep their hands in themselves, or they have poor sportsmanship, or they're struggling to find friends to play with, they might spend recess in my room for a couple weeks. Again, learning those social skills. They have one-on-one correction with other kids that might be playing up there at the time, and then hopefully learn and take those skills back out to the playground from there.
I think, like, one of the kids, for example, like, here's just a moment, it is just having a hard go, and so within the class period, it's just, seamlessly, I think it was like, I don't know, probably 30 times within a small morning group lesson, like, floating, pushing, just can't really contain their bodies, and so we didn't want to exclude them, and so for a while, he was doing like a Google Meet into his classroom, and he, like, was literally laying on that roller ball, like, swinging back and forth as he was watching it on class, and then he would click to raise his hand, you know, on the Google Meet and participate, and still be part of it without disrupting the classroom. And so we have all these creative ways to kind of keep kids engaged, and re-engaged, I think, which is really important. And I would say, so Melissa's background is in social work, like, I got lucky on how that all worked out, and so the things that she does the backpack program, the snack program, we have our own, like, mini heart locker within, we run our student assistance program group, and she really puts all that together. We have shared recess that she monitors, and so there's just so much that she does that helps everybody else. But what you can see is kids that typically might spend more time in resource support or out of the classroom are in a space and re-engaging, and there's time to do that one-on-one or one-on-three time. And then, like, you see these little guys, kindergarten is really hard. And if you're a little person, like Mtsca, who's on the autism spectrum, a lunchroom with 100 kids, the smells, the noises, is too much. And so we we have this ability to say, oh, you can go to the lunchroom here, eat, and then go outside. And so it just allows for all of that flexibility, and, I mean, or you get a chance to come to 24th at 9:30, nobody say the date, but just to see it, like, to try to, like, I get stressed out trying to, like, express its greatness in the amount of time that we have, but it's really incredible what she does, and it's just not everywhere, and I believe that it should be. We spent a lot of time in safety work, and one little gal we have who's been through a very traumatic event, we, met on what we can do. She's 7, but she's probably functioning at more of a 3-year-old state, so there's a lot of trauma, so it's not clear cut what special needs she has. And, we Googled I said something about, like, isn't there like a Denver or something? And much to the wonderful staff, I was like, I think what you mean is, and she pulls up the checklist. And so things like skipping and crawling and sharing are all the things she missed in her traumatic experience. And so then she goes to ALC every day to work on just those skills. And so it's just like magnificent. Go ahead, you're very good. And I guess we can show one last page. These are the things she does to meet their needs. And so, once upon a time, I was here last year, a sex program. And the ASCENT program presented, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. And I'm like, hey, we should get together. She starts working with us, and Melissa is able to kind of take over, and now the ASCENT kids, who are, you know, kind of an at-risk population in the high school, are leaders for our at-risk kids at Edgerton. And so they're pen pals throughout the year. They have another visit coming. They make Christmas ornaments together. And the ASCENT teacher told me, like, there are kids that can't get to school. In my class, they always show up when we go to your school. So, it's just so cool to see kids who are typically leaders in high school being leaders. And these kids love them. Really will share a lot of their heart in these letters to these kids.
It's helpful. The high school students can be a positive role model, so our kids can ask questions and kind of get ready for middle school. Friendships. That's also the staff groups are student friendship connection groups that we've just started this year. And again, it just helps the kids learn about feelings and expressing those feelings and how to build a friendship and get them out young with all these skills that hopefully they. And I think that's the main thing is seeing these kids have success in whatever areas you can.
And I said, nobody has to talk, so there'll be no friends. I hope you can come, but if you can't, that's your regular schedule. I didn't make that up. I just made it up. Regular schedule, Edgerton, tour to Edgerton, but come anytime. Like, it's really magnificent. And we knew we were doing cool things, but it is another thing to have people in the valley come up and spend some time with Melissa and the room. And to talk to the tribe in Browning was actually really amazing and powerful. And so that is a small, like, kind of slicky way of explaining what it's actually an experience. Are there any questions that will make you? Yes, my question.
And it's a question for Melissa. Can someone get Jenna tissues? There's one right behind you, Melissa.
Mine are in my purse. I'm always here.
Melissa, do you ever feel, like in your day that it's overwhelming, like you have too many kids at once? Like, do you feel like there's enough support in there?
I do. There are a few times during the day that my numbers grow, but I've been able to state that, and we've been able to work out where one lady gets done in the lunchroom a little bit early before she goes outside, and so she comes up and helps. Or our counselor comes up often throughout the day and sit or sits or whatever, and yeah, I feel like the times that I need someone, I'm able to.
2 questions. One is, to what degree do you get parents say, my child doesn't To what degree do you get parents to say, my child doesn't belong in there, and to what degree do you get parents to say, yes, my child belongs in there? And what other kind of general comments do you get from the parents as a result of their children being in there?
I'd say the majority of it, is gonna shock you, but it all depends on how we communicate it. So if it's not communicated ahead of time to parents, there is, like, what is it? And what, and then communicating it as a whole school about that this is not, because it's multi-purpose, it just does not have the connotation. There was a form of it before I came, but it was really just for work completion. And so I think they felt like, and then I'm in trouble. But because there's exercise and there's regulation and there's sometimes like you've got a broken arm and you can't go to recess, you get to play, the negative connotation really is probably like 98 to like 2% who might say, I don't want my kids to have a part of it. And then I have to sit down, same with like tiered recess, which is supported recess. And then I just have a meeting with them about, here's why, here's the purpose, there's always goals that connect with these plans. And if parents say they don't want it, then we don't do it. But then the alternative sometimes is going home or, and so I think parents really appreciate the whole approach. Oh, you had two, is that the whole, those?
Well,
One, A and B.
both extremes.
Got it, A
And
and
then,
B.
and then the last one is, I'll rephrase the last one, and that is, what frequency do you get positive comments from the parents as a result, and do they see results from school year to school year as a result of their child being in the program the prior year?
So I think it's more indirect. I mean, I'm answering this because if a parent's mad or happy, they usually come to me. If they're never unhappy, I try never to let them go anywhere else. But I think, what they see is just growth, like less phone calls home, more problems, so like solution-based conversations. And so they seem to have this positive impact instead of like, your kid is blowing up the room, end of sentence. It's, hey, it's really hard during this time of the day, and this is what we noticed, and here's the data. So she's part of my systems and support team. She can come, she collects every kid's name and why they come in and when they came in and where they came from. And she can say, whoa, this kid, does anybody else notice that this kid's really struggling at this place? And then we can talk about it. So because it's solution-based and that she's part of all of those meetings and things, that parents really have a hard time struggling with it because we just communicate the plan. But there's a solution always.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question, maybe it's Steve Melissa. You find, because I think your class was exciting. I would love to go in there and jump, or I'd love to participate on the ball and
Yeah.
just be able to bounce on the
I
ball.
have some staff to come in.
Yeah, okay, well, do you have some other kids who want to participate that way and are kind of upset that they can't participate that way and have to stay in the regular classroom?
I do find that, I hear that sometimes. A few teachers have implemented, like rewards in their class, like, I don't know what they do to earn the points, but once you get a certain amount of points, then you can go to ALC for a fun break, and so that is where that gets implemented. We do see kids, maybe acting out because they want to go to the ALC, but
They have to
sure, it's
switch
no
it
fun
up,
at all.
Yeah. Even, we have everybody accessing it, including our life skills kids. Everybody can access it. But yeah, we do want to have kids that, we all need regulation. I mean, today I just took like a quick loop before I came in here because it was a hard day. You got to present. I mean, it's not a negative behavior. Like everybody, if you parent a child, you have been dysregulated. So more than others, but we're all better. So I think that the more we see it as like everybody gets access to it, the better the reputation is as far as getting to.
Thank you. There's a book out that talks about upstream heroes. And Melissa, I think you're one of those upstream heroes. And the author talks about the people in our society that are working really, really hard and maybe don't get the big limelight thank yous and accolades and stuff, but those people are upstream and they are preventing a lot of things negatively from happening, a lot of negative things from happening. And when I listen to the story about the ALC at Edgerton, what comes to mind is that you're one of those upstream heroes for us, and I'm very appreciative of that. And then, Jen, my comment that I have appreciated about Edgerton is there's a tremendous amount of research out there about school climate, and that when you walk into a school, ideally you want just this ray of sunshine to hit you when you walk into a school. And I think that is immediately one of the strengths of Edgerton. You have a lot of things going very well at Edgerton, but from the potted live flowers at the door to the sign above the entry, above that library that says you belong here, I can't imagine a more powerful statement to have in an elementary school. And your wall, I mean, every time I'm out there, that wall is changing, and it's wonderful, inviting things. And again, if there's a textbook example of how to do that incredibly well, you guys are doing it out there. So I thank you for your leadership and paying attention to that level of detail. So upstream hero right there.
She is amazing, and I would say, without a doubt, she has helped change the trajectory of a child's education. So it's important work, and I didn't explain this well before presentation. Like, okay, at graduation, like, I mean, I did not explain it well. So thank you for being such an inviting place for her to talk. One is an extreme extrovert, the other is not. So I put her in a hard spot, but she deserves all the credit. So I just wanted to make sure you met her, and anytime you're welcome to visit. Thank you, bye.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Okay, next up on the agenda, we have our monthly financial reports. Let's start with the health insurance financial report.
Okay, this is the monthly statement of the health insurance plan. We start with just as of March 31st, the balances in our cash accounts, which you see there, and then the accounts receivable, that money that is coming to us that just hasn't been received into the cash account yet. So we do have a positive amount there of $261,000. And then going down into the liabilities, these are expenditures that, again, have occurred. We just haven't paid them out yet. We do see the loan from School District 5 sitting there too with our liabilities. Let's see, you can scroll down a little more, and then the net of those two equal our equity, and that's made up of our net revenue for the fiscal year, which is about $457,000 you see in highlighted in yellow, and that ties to another statement we'll look at in just a minute. And then if you scroll down just a little bit more, our total equity ends up being that minus amount of a little over $1 million. So that's our snapshot in time let's see, 9 months into the fiscal year. And then if you scroll down more, then we just look at the revenues and the expenditures for this fiscal year. So we're 9 months in, and this first part is just a combination of the health insurance plan, the dental insurance plan, premiums coming in and expenditures going out. And then So it shows the total revenues and total expenditures. Those are in the far right column, highlighted in yellow. And then, so that's the combined statement. And then the statements following that just break out, just the medical portion only for the year. So, the health insurance only, we're seeing the premiums that are coming in, and the employee contributions, and then the claims being paid out. So we can look at, just, the separate components of the plan. So this, first set of, revenue versus expenditure statements are just health only. Then you can scroll more and see the, dental, let's see, that's still health. Oh, no, this is the dental plan. So we can see how, each component of the health insurance fund is doing. And then this last one is, a comparison to, comparing 9 months this year versus 9 months worth, as of last year. So just kind of seeing where we're at this March compared to last March.
Thanks.
Yes.
In the past, we've seen, some reports on the Care Here Clinic, more about utilization rate, because the funds, you don't ever see how it's really affecting with the wellness portion. But I was curious in the coming months if we could see some reports on the Care Here Clinic, as well as hear some conversation. I know in the past there were other entities that were interested in joining the Care Here, and I'm just curious if there's any progress in that. Thank you.
Any other questions? Any public comment? Oh, actually, this is just information, so never mind. Okay, let's move on to the budget report.
Okay, this report, starts out with the elementary funds, and, the first section of this report tracks the budgeted funds, which is the first group, and what the expenditure budget is for the year. That's that first column. And then in the expenditures, we see two columns, which would be the year-to-date expenses plus those that we've committed to but not paid out yet, and then the balance remaining. This is also, for 9 months of the fiscal year. And then to the right of that, we track, the expenditures as well. So, the cash reappropriated column is just that, money that we had left over from last year that we carry forward. And then, year to date, what we've received in revenues for the year.
No, it's,
Oh, okay.
cleaner outside.
Okay, so then, I think it all looks pretty good. As we kind of discussed this last Friday, that, second half property tax payments, which, are primary resource of funding for all these budgeted funds, second half property tax payments come in May. So that's a big chunk of money. So you don't see that on the revenue side yet. There's also, some state and county payments in the transportation fund and the general fund that we don't have booked yet because we won't receive them until May. And then moving down to the the high school, same thing with the budgeted funds in the high school, so. Are there any questions about that report, the budget report? We're gonna talk about budgets, in Budget 101 later. So you might have to refer back to this, I don't know.
Okay, no questions? Keep going, Denise.
Okay. I think I have 4 reports in a row. Okay. Later on, we'll talk about budget versus cash. So, here's the cash flow report for both the elementary and the high school, and the elementary's on top, high school's on the bottom. So you can see kind of the cash, the flow of cash, or the balances, I guess, at the end of every month of the year through the 9 months that we've had. So the far right one is kind of what I usually look at, you know, just to see. And then if you could scroll it just a little bit, Kelly, there's a column there. So March, those are our ending cash balances as of March 31st. And then to the right of that are the operating reserves that we've held from last year's fund balance in the general fund, transportation fund, let's see, the retirement fund, and there's one more, adult ed. So, by state law, we're allowed to hold a certain percentage, of our cash, and so we try to monitor that because we try to maximize that, and that helps our cash flow for the next year. And we'll talk about that later too. So the first half of the, report is the elementary funds, and the bottom half of the report is the high school funds. Up there on the elementary is our self-insurance fund. And then the internal service fund that you see there, that's our print shop. And we haven't showed up with them yet. We do that at the end of the year. So that's why you see a negative balance there. All I have for that one. And then finally, there we have the food service report. And that's the food service fund is a cash fund. They've got a nice fund balance going here because of the federal reimbursement that we've been getting, covers all meals. I think that's true through June 30th, and they're going to stop. So we get federal reimbursement not only for free and reduced price meals, but the fully paid meals. So that's kind of increased their fund balance over time, and Jana is taking advantage of that extra money and looking over all the equipment that she uses in the school food service program, and she's upgrading some of her equipment, which is what you approved last time. Got a couple more months to go, and they will be running a summer program too.
Any questions? Thank you, Denise. Next up is human resources and personnel action items.
Now I'm going to take this one tonight. Tracy is doing duty as a board member for the United Way, and so they have a meeting tonight. So this is just our typical hires, resignations, terminations that we would usually bring forward to the board. And one of them that I wanted to point out is in the resignation termination section, John Lockwood was a science teacher that was offered a position in our district and has since rescinded his acceptance of that offer. So that's the first one of those this year where we've offered a position to someone and they've not been able to accept it, housing costs or some other reason. So fortunate one to see. But any questions?
I'd move to approve the bill.
Thank you, Lance. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Heather. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passed unanimously. Thank you. Next up, in business, Flathead High School's ed teacher request.
One right there on the
preliminary draft on statement meeting where I show you that time and time again for special ed needs, but, I've been chatting with the board a lot about the growth in special education. This request was vetted through personnel and finance. As you know, we just have seen this real increase, and as our high schools, meeting that, starting in February with our partner district, we started pulling data together and realized that Flathead High School has some definite needs. So not only in an effort to meet the needs of an population, but really to ensure equity between Glacier and Flathead. And so the chart that you have in front of you really shows population comparisons, just total school population, the number of students currently in resource programs and or life skills programs, and anticipated enrollment for next year. So you can see Glacier and Flathead enrollment of students with disabilities is actually pretty similar, but next year at Flathead, we have upwards of 26 students who would meet that criteria. And so I've shared before, typically life skills classroom case manager would have 8 to 10 students, and so this is what I said. The other piece I wanted to draw your attention to is just the total number of certified staff between both schools and the total number of paraeducators. So right now, there's 8 certified staff at each high school, but Glacier has a 9th person in their transition specialist. Jennifer's doing a great job over there. What we're seeing with job skill readiness and the post-secondary transition component of our IEP, as well as the new legislation that helps students through their 22nd birthday, they need eligibility, this area becomes even more important, especially with the life skills population. So the recommendation to really look at that equity piece and make sure we have our needs met is, I shared in the last personnel meeting that was interim in the Aspire program, has an increase in needs additional staffing. So we're transferring 1 para from Glacier to Aspire later in next school year. The Glacier team's been collaborative and awesome. And that'll really make sure that all 3 high schools have an appropriate level of para support. And then the request is to seek board approval for an additional certified special education or FTE at Flathead High School. So back to the main board request, we're looking to fund that out of tuition fund and or a combination of Medicaid. It'll really, the hard part with the student transition from partner districts is their continuum of special ed services and supports just ours. Oftentimes our partner districts don't have enough students who fit a life skills program to have a life skills program, so they creatively serve this population. So it's not until we actually see those IEPs and get to know those students when we determine half-time life skills, half-time in another program, and then that will drive our funding mechanism, whether it's tuition and or a combination of Medicaid. Request will not impact the general fund. Any questions?
Just something I don't know about. What's the transition specialist?
So the transition specialist in Glacier really runs or helps support their job skills program primarily for students in the life skills classroom. So she's got partnerships out in the community, within the school community, and then out in the community to really prepare kids for employment once they graduate. And so she supports the programs. We've got kids at UCC, we've got kids at local businesses and organizations really learning that readiness so that when they do graduate from school, they're able to find meaningful work. So our special ed teachers have taught job skills at Flathead in the past, but with the increase in students and just having the program, this is the 30 years of the program, is definitely an area that we're going to focus on attention on. We're going to choose at Flathead to do that with a special ed teacher versus a transition specialist, although both can provide similar services.
Any other questions for Sarah? Anyone like to make a motion?
I move to approve a 1.0 special education teacher request as presented.
Thank you, Heather. Is there a second? Thank you, Mark. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passed unanimously. Thank you, Sarah. Next up is our self-funded insurance.
I don't know if you guys just noticed that switcheroo right there.
It was scene one.
And just so you know, having Scott Haas, join us remotely, he's actually in a work/dinner, engagement, so he's gonna be calling in, to hopefully answer any questions or do a better job of explaining everything. So I'm gonna do my best. So tonight in front of you, that's sensitive. He's calling it. Okay. Some changes to our insurance. One is a change to our vision, program. We currently don't have one. All of our local providers, backed out of Emeritus, and, we are, recommending a self-funded vision plan managed by Allegiance, which is our new third-party provider. We're also looking at a recommendation to approving a rate increase of 3.8% to the overall plan. Scott Haas, who's our advisor, will be joining us, and he's calculated these rates based on our actuarial, what our plan costs have been so far this year, and things have actually been really good. So we were happy to see such a low percentage on the overall increase. And then we've also done a number of changes. The board's approved moving from First Choice to Allegiance. So we changed our third-party provider. We have switched our dental provider to MetLife, and our life insurance provider to Horace Mann. So all of those things have helped reduce some plan costs for us overall. There have been some credits. And in that increase, it also factored in a 15% increase for stop loss coverage as well. So he feels like this is a really good increase for us. We, as a committee, we usually talk 5%. He felt very comfortable recommending a lower percentage forward. The last piece is to recommend adopting plan rates as proposed by Scott. So I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint. This is weird because I never run the. Where did it go?
Don't mess up my job. And Micah, this is Scott. I'm here.
Hey, Scott. Thank you for joining us. Oh, they're right here. All right. So this is a PowerPoint that Scott put together, and I'm going to jump down to towards the end here. This is that's interesting. I don't know what that is. Something got corrupted when we posted this, but this is looking at our change in our insurance, going from the DSTS Choice Network to the Allegiance contracted provider, just looking at the benefits and what's covered in that for the insurance plan. The insurance committee did approve this at our last meeting. So any questions on that one? And vision is voluntary. We don't have to sign up for vision. All right, Scott, I'm gonna show. I don't know if you're looking at your document that you sent us, but what you're seeing at the top of this is our current 21-22 plan year breakdown for our employees. And on the left, you see there's 4 tiers to it. There's employee only, which is EE. Oh, Scott needs me to make this bigger. Sorry. How's that, Scott?
Thank you.
All right, so right up here, employee only, employee spouse, employee child, family. And these are the number of individuals in our staff that are currently enrolled in our plan in those categories. So we have about 584 plan participants right now in our insurance. And then what it does is it breaks out what the total value of just the medical side of the plan is per employee per month, and then the dental, and then the life, and then there's a combined rate over here on the right. And so what you're looking at is in that combined rate, if you are an employee only, the district contributes $814.02 to your health insurance, and the employee pays $104.33. That represents an 88 to 11% split for the employee only. And then as you move through the plan, you can see that the cost of the plan, depending on which group you're in, increases. The employer's rate stays the same, but the employee rate goes up. And Scott does most of those calculations for us. There's a technical slope stuff that goes on. I have no idea what's behind the curtain when he's calculating this, but we trust him. But you can see what happens to the employer share and employee share. And one of the things that we talk about as we've negotiated our insurance with our various unions is that as a district, we try and maintain a 70-30 split on the employer cost versus the employee cost. Everybody follow me on that? Okay. So moving into next year with the increase, what we see, and I'm going to just focus on the combined plan over here, is that the employer rate goes up for the district for the single employee, and the employee only share actually goes down by about $1. And the reason that is we have to, because of the Affordable Care Act, provide an affordable plan for our employees. And then when there's an increase, what happens is the employer share, and you can see it actually went down on the employer share side of things, but the employee share went up. And so we still maintain, close to that 70-30 split overall. But what you see is that the employer's share towards the insurance for those groups has gone down, and the employee share goes up. So if I were just to use general numbers and say the total insurance plan went up $200,000, that $200,000 gets, because of the individual employee, gets shifted down. The cost of that gets shifted down to those who have children, a spouse, or a family. And everybody can say that the employee-only level basically remains the same. And so you can see Scott has calculated the plan. Looks like it's about a $272,000 increase overall for the plan, but that is being shouldered by this group of employees right here. And so one of the things is we talk about recruitment, retention, and how we support our staff. We look at, when we negotiate, we look at the value of the salary increases, but we also look at the district's contribution to health insurance. And so we've been very clear that it's a part of the total compensation package as we move that forward. And what Scott has proposed is that we look at the district to share in the cost of that plan, where you truly get a 70-30 split based on the employee and not as a district as a whole. And it has a significant cost associated with it, and you can see that cost right down here. It's about $605,000. Oops. I don't know how to use this computer. $605,019 is what's projected right now for an overall increase to the plan, if the board chooses to pay the rates as proposed in these. Scott, how did I do on explaining that?
Yeah, you did a great job because what's happened in past practice, and we've talked about this for the last 4 or 5 years, is that the district was using more of a defined benefit, or a defined contribution, where it was easier for them to budget by putting a fixed number in. But what in reality has been happening, we've been able to maintain a 70-30 contribution in the aggregate level, meaning that the district paid 70%, the employees paid 30%. But you can see by those rate tiers then that the employee contributions for their dependents is being disproportionately influenced by that. So what we're proposing then for the 2022 plan year is that we realign to the actuarial contribution values so that you can see on the far right that the employees for the dependent, the employee plus spouse, employee plus child, and then the employee plus family, that the employees then are actually paying 30% of the total of that tier. And then you can see what the net result is. And what that does is when we look at any kind of variance year over year, is it now will equalize the distribution of the rate adjustment over the tiers appropriately rather than disproportionately. Because if you look up above at what would happen to the employees if we didn't do this, with this renewal, the family contribution, for example, the family would be paying 50.3% of the total premium cost, not the 30%. So one, it better aligns you with your bargaining agreement with the bargaining units, and then second, it puts you into an actuarial valuation that'll now stabilize the plan and the district contributions and the employee contributions going forward.
Thank you, Scott. Are there questions for Scott or myself? And I have another document I want to show you before.
Micah, I had a question on the enrollment totals.
Mm-hmm.
So when somebody's in the family plan, you've got that 106, is that just the employee counted and not the family member?
Correct.
Same for employee and spouse?
Yep, those are just the employees in the plan.
Yeah, so on this account, you have, as you can see here, approximately 584 employees by count in each of those tiers, but there's approximately 1,300 total members when you would include the spouses, the children, and the total family content.
So I'm going to switch to the other document here real quick. And what you see up here, based off of the rates, and if things stayed exactly the way that they were, someone who is employee plus their family, this is the out-of-pocket expense on the insurance based on the rates for this year. And then this is what the rates would be for next year. So the difference is $855 more out of pocket, and that's just for the medical. And what I did is I actually went in, and these are actual employees in our district. So this is a teacher, this is a para, admin assistant, food service worker, part-time food service worker, and a custodian. And these are their actual salaries for this year. And this is their monthly net take-home pay after their deductions. So that's FICA, Medicare, health insurance, if they have dental, vision, all of that stuff. So if I apply a 2% increase to this teacher, it's a difference of $767. So that teacher's going to make that much more next year. I'll just slide it over. So that teacher is going to make $767 more next year. Their insurance is going to go up $855. So they're going to make $88 less next year than they did this year with a 2% increase. So as you look through, these positions, this is a para. This is, you know, a fairly high-paid para position at $26,000 annually. This part-time food service worker in March netted $23 take home after all their deductions. And so I present this to show you what happens, and especially for groups of our employees. And I'll be the first to say I can afford the $855 increase. This isn't, you know, about me, but when I look at it from the overall perspective of all of our employee groups and what the real impact is on this, on top of the inflationary increases and those other things, this is where this is my advocacy to the board to say, I think this is something that we can do as a part of their total compensation package, to support them in, raising a family and earning the wages that they earn, in our community. Questions about this? Yeah, well,
How much do you think this would really impact retention? I mean, is this the sort of thing that the person calculates when they're trying to go to another job or another school district?
well, I think it can greatly impact retention for us, and I think it can impact even on the front end, the recruitment. And I'm gonna use Denise as an example. When we hired Denise and we told her, hey, the district pays 70% of the insurance, oh, that's great. And then you kind of read through the fine print and you get your first pay stub, and it's like, wait a minute, that's not 70% of my insurance. That's only 50% of my insurance. So I think in a lot of ways, I think you can see that we have people who are literally working for insurance, in today's market. And this is something that we provide. So I think it's a huge benefit. One of the other things we looked at was county, city, and the hospital and a private company, and they structure their plans very similar to what is being proposed, where they have the different tiers, but the overall share is proportionate to whatever tier you're in. So we're also trying to be competitive with, the city or the county if they have or the hospital or custodians. They don't have paras, but whether it's food service or any of those other positions. So it's a big ask.
Micah, just another question. So this is gonna cost us a bit more. How does that impact, because I know we made adjustments in order to pay off that debt that we have. Impact that? Where is the money coming?
Good question.
I'm not on the finance committee, so I'm clueless.
So when we talk about whether, when we're looking at, negotiations or salary increases or health insurance contributions, what we would look to for where the additional funds would come from, I would point to our increase in A&D as one of those sources. I would point to the elementary levy for now that we did not impose last year. The increase in property value will also generate increases. So this is something that we feel like is, could be supported within our operating budget and looking ahead to next year.
And it won't really impact the loan payments?
So there is a Denise referenced this in the insurance financials, that there's a $725,000 loan to the plan that was paid for by the interlocal agreement. That's been on the books since 2017. And we haven't worked to address that yet because we have not built up a reserve. So it's part of this process over the last 5 years, and what Scott's been working with us on is getting to our plan to a place where it's stable, where we're getting, some moderate increases year over year. We know that the cost of healthcare has gone up, prescriptions have gone up, everything's gone up. And so we're always trying to get to a place where we can be in the black at the end of the year. And then there's a formula that's out there. I still haven't been able to find the document. I saw it once where once we hit a certain level in reserves, we would pay back a certain percentage towards the loan.
The loan is a big dilemma. And I'm just going to use the number 75-25 as opposed to 76-24. But industry standards are typically in that 75-25% as far as health insurance. The employer pays 75%, the employee 25%. That's plus or minus, but it's not the 40-60 or 50-50 that our direction of plan's been going in. When you look at the $725,000 from 5 years ago, a lot of that, well, there's
two aspects to that. One is the fact that we had a lot of large claims that you can't anticipate. The second is the sharing of the costs back then, where maybe the district, was in that, was nowhere close to that 75-25% sharing. So it could be considered that the employer wasn't fully funding their fair share of it and putting the burden on the employees. So those are going to be discussions that we'll need to have, not today, not this spring, but we'll need to talk about it over the next year or so to address the 725, because it is on the books, it has been on the books, does not appear that this year anything will be paid back toward it based on the formula that we passed. So it's just something that we're gonna have to talk about. It was incurred by employees from the past that don't exist anymore, so there may only be 2/3 of the employees on the plan now are the ones that may have attributed a little bit to that amount versus the third that are no longer around and on the plan. So you carry something forward and you have the current participants pay on it. So those are just all aspects that we're gonna need to talk about related to that. But as far as the funding, the sharing of it, we're on a trajectory where it's not what is represented in the 70-30 is a plan sharing, but not a participant, which was explained already. And so when you look at the industry standard based on the participant level, we have more of a burden on the employees than on the school district. And I'm comfortable, because may say I'm comfortable, it's not something I like doing, but it's increasing costs, but it's just a direction that we're gonna eventually have to go. And we might as well take the first step.
Any other questions? I know we talked about this at length in the finance committee meeting and kind of brainstormed some different options. And bottom line is, we're not living up to what we're telling teachers, staff. And when we're struggling to get staff, we need to support them.
The only thing I want to add is, yes, this is going to increase the cost $600,000, and it is something we're going to have to look at, not so much in the next fiscal year, but in years definitely 3 and 4, because we're going to be we've received a lot of stimulus money along the way, and we have a lot of different types of things that have been added, and when that money goes away, it's going to come back and say, okay, how are we going to address, and I'll just use the word cliff again. We're going to have a cliff where we really need to look at years during this budgeting session. What does years 3 and 4 look like in order to figure out, will we have enough money to support everything we've been doing, and if not, let's come up with a plan as to where things are going to get cut back. This won't probably get cut back, but there may be other things that we'll need to be looking at. So we may be supporting this, but there's going to be other things that are going to be more uncomfortable than this.
Thank you, Jack. Any other questions? Comments? Are you comfortable making a motion?
So I'll move to approve the self-funded insurance changes as presented.
Thank you, Will. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Diane. Been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passed unanimously.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Scott.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye now.
Bye, Scott.
Okay, next up on the agenda, City of Kalispell 50/50 sidewalk replacement program. Greg?
Hello. Preston Hallsville, great. So this is, sorry, guys, that's my eyes. So this is for, Peterson. There's a 50/50 split on the sidewalk, over there, which is a continuation from before I got here. And great program. We did, Russell last year, and, so I think our cost this year is around 20,000, 19 and some change on the body, and 19,274, 35 total, because we have some extra stuff that we're gonna do inside of the confines of our property. We're gonna do a significant amount of concrete there. I believe it's Sandon that's still doing it, and they're giving us the, city rate on that. I believe I would be able to pay for it's a win-win. It's a no-brainer, we should do it. They'll probably start that, they guarantee us it'll be done before schools in next year. We may do a little extra when we get in there. Tracy talks me into doing a little bit over there by the office and putting a bench. Walking across there, but, we talked about last year, we just didn't have time to do it. And it didn't have. Forward.
Any questions for Greg? Anybody comfortable making the motion?
So move, Sue.
Thank you, Lance. Anybody want a second?
Oh, that's right.
Oh, thank you for reminding me.
I'll second that, Sue.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Elementary trustees, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passed unanimously. Okay, next, flooring bids for Russell.
So, I got two bids, I got one, so the low bid was about $114,000, and then we have to do some abatement in there, which is around $35,000. Looking at about $145 total cost on the bid. The issue we have is there is a section of the main hallway that is wood flooring with subflooring that we're gonna have to pull out, so we're gonna have to do some work in there. I'm gonna have my guys do that, the maintenance guys. I can't find a contractor that subflooring after, Kirby pulls out the abatement on there, and a little bit of stuff tickling in the back of my head that's saying we're gonna have a little issue in there, so I mean, I could say $145,000, but I'm thinking there's gonna be a little more cost in there somewhere involved, especially with the building that old, and that's why I put a price tag on that at about $160,000. It has the nuances going in, we may do a little painting, but I think as I'm looking at my budget in the, maintenance, that we may be able to, afford to do a little bit of that for us, so, carpet store is $114, and then Kirby was about $135, and we're gonna have some clearances in there. I did some research, I asked some follow-up questions with, Kirby on clearances, so when you do abatement, you have to contain it, and then you have to do clearances as you do that. And they're saying they can do one containment, and go ahead and say we're gonna do 5. And the only reason I'm saying that is because I'm not 100% sure, I can't wrap my head around it yet. And so, and containments here are about $1,500 a piece. I'm kind of building a budget. I just want to be sure I don't want to come back to you guys
for $2,000 on a $150,000 project. So 160 should be good, and got some overruns. I feel that the maintenance budget, we are going to do the portable in the back. On that, and we're gonna put, LED in it. There will be no waxing anything. So, right now, there will be no, after we're done, the only flooring that'll have to be maintained in there, that's mopping and stuff, and vacuuming. In the hardwood flooring.
Questions, comments?
I'd like to move to approve the bid for Russell School carpet replacement, not to exceed $160,000 funded by the builder.
Thank you, Lance. Is there a second from an elementary trustee?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Diane. Been moved and seconded, and this is an elementary trustee vote only. So elementary trustees in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passed unanimously. Next up, got another switcheroo here. Transportation building.
All right. So in my superintendent's update, I sent an email saying that I wanted to put this on the agenda for information only tonight, so not asking for any decisions. But I want to give the whole board a chance to see kind of what we've been working through and working on as it relates to the transportation building and construction costs. It's really pretty and fancy, so it's taking a while to load. You're gonna be impressed, I know. Ooh. Look at that. So that is a rendering from our architect of our transportation building. This is the bus barn. So we have 4 bays here. 3 of them are drive-through, 1 is not. So we can pull a bus all the way around, and you can't see it here, but there's parking lot back in this area as well. And then this last bay here is a wash bay for our buses. And then over here is maintenance, primarily, and all the offices are in this building as well for transportation. This is maintenance building, and it's a long building. It's kind of hard to see in this perspective. Also has offices, and on this side of the building is where our print shop and shipping and receiving and all of those functions that you have to deal with as a school district are going to be housed in a centralized location. And then this building over here is essentially covered storage. There will be a propane fill station back here for our propane buses. So, and there'll be an in and drive all the way through and an out. So that's just kind of the picture of what it looks like. We'll do this. So, you know, the process for how we are where we're at today really started with a discussion with the city, who a few years ago said, hey, we'd like to kick the squatters off of our property. We want to take that over. We're expanding. We've got needs. And so we started down this road. We looked for a piece of property, and last year the voters approved the acquisition of that property. And then we started working with our architects and engineers to design what it is that we would hope to accomplish, looking to the future to build with it would, you know, accommodate expansion and growth of our district, which we're certainly experiencing. And so we kind of went through that process. We revised the overall design. Some things were added, some things were removed. And then we went through a process to hire a general contractor, and that was Martell Construction. And so they take that initial plan, they look at it and they say, this is kind of what we think it's gonna cost based off of how things are going right now. We kind of go through and review the design again, we look for some things that maybe could reduce costs, and then we ask the board to approve a budget for the structure, and we had it at around $5 million. And we had money in the interlocal agreement that we've been setting aside through increased, levy and transportation, and then we also had increased permit, transportation levy this year as well to get us to that $5 million. And then we started going through, some of the phases of, what would be bid out first and what would come second. And, right away, we saw that that pre-engineered metal buildings, EEB, are going to be, more than we thought. And so, a relook at it and, okay, we think we're actually gonna need about, $800,000 more, and the board approved in November, $800,000 more towards this project. And then we put things out to, so, and I kind of talked about this already, but you like the blueprint design over here. And so, we had that kind of initial, this is what everyone was thinking it was gonna cost. And then the general contractor starts really putting pencil to paper, and they said, we think this project's going to start costing closer to $6.5 million. And so we went through and did some budget reductions to try and bring that cost down. So we put out for bid phase 1, which is a pre-engineered metal building, and, this is basically the structure that we're talking about. It has a metal skin on it for siding, they put an insulation liner panel in it, and that's about it, and a roof on it. So that's what's included in that cost, and that is design and installation for that building. And we thought originally that, upwards of $800,000, the actual cost for the pre-engineered metal buildings was $1.3 million. So we already saw this kind of cost escalation, but we put it out separate and first so that, one, we could secure a contractor, we could beat rising steel prices, beat an increase in wage from the federal government and how they calculate wages for these kinds of projects. It would fit our bill schedule. So then we move on to phase 2, and this is everything else. So this is the site work, excavating out material, putting in fill, it's the concrete, it's the asphalt, it's the interior finishes. Are we gonna be putting up, wainscoting on the walls, or, just drywall, whatever, plumbing, electrical, HVAC, insulation, and landscaping. So then I was at a legislative meeting, and this was a slide, I took a screenshot on my computer, but this was a slide that was presented from the American General Contractors Association of the escalating prices that they are seeing in the industry from April of 2020, so this is starting at 0, through February of 22. So we're already in April, we're almost at the end of May, and you can see that diesel fuel alone has come up 237%, steel 113%, lumber and plywood 101%. Everything has gone up. The bid price on new non-residential building construction generally up 18%. Because everybody's trying to get the same workforce, and so they're having to pay higher wages, et cetera. So I want to kind of leave that in, just keep that in the back of your mind. So then, it's bid opening day, right? We put out everything in phase 2, we got our bids back, and keep in mind that what you're about to see were the low bids.
We need oxygen.
Yeah.
And these are documents that Martel sends us, and they're a PDF, and so these are screenshots of those documents. So I know it's really small here, and I can try and zoom in a little bit. But what they do is they break it up into these different divisions, right? So here's general requirements. Nothing really changed on the base bid for the general requirements for Martel. Then they looked at the concrete. So concrete came in at almost $750,000 just for the concrete for this place. There's a $15,000 allowance for CMU, which is basically cinder block. And this is to enclose the dumpsters that will be there for garbage. And then steel, 61,000. And this is like the steel that goes in the concrete, right? So this is all getting buried. The wood, plastic, and composites, 125,000. So you can see there's all these costs. The other thing that we did through this process is we said, well, if we could do this, this would be really nice, because if we don't do this, it'll probably never happen. So one of them was to enclose and divide that storage building, that long covered storage, into some separate bays. There was, so there's these alternates that were in there. So some of these things were bid on as alternates. Increased protection for transportation building concrete slabs. That was to put a sealer on the concrete after it's all, those kind of things. Automatic gates in lieu of manual gates for where the buses come in and out. We thought, well, that'd be really nice and convenient. Let's just see what it would cost. It's not a must-have, but it's something that we thought we'd look at. So that's what these numbers in green are the base bid prices. Electrical, $707,500. Plumbing, $12,000 for the plumbing, $375,000 for the HVAC, the mechanical and HVAC systems in the building. Earthwork, and what they did when Knife River bid this out, they included the site concrete, the asphalt paving and striping in this. So when, like, the concrete would be like any curbing or sidewalk, things like that. It's not the foundation for these buildings. So they get these bid package totals, and what you see is, you know, for all of these things up above, it comes out to about $4.7 million. You have your liability insurance, you have your payment bond, you have your fees, your taxes, and then you have a contingency that's built in there as well. That's a 5% contingency. Actually, a kind of a low contingency. So the grand total of phase 2 came out to $5.3 million. We already have spent 1.3 on the pre-engineered metal buildings. So that's putting our project budget at $6.6 million. So that's an increase of almost $1 million. So then what we did once we did that is we of course went back and said, you know, what are some of the modifications, things that we could do in the PEMB, that's pre-engineered metal building. We reduced about $136,000 worth of things. So examples include the original design had a 1-foot overhang. That is a 0 overhang. Right? There's no eave on this building, it's just a box. It included things like removing interior liner panels, which would be metal, in places that we didn't need them. On the exterior of the building, we were going to be fancy and turn the siding horizontal instead of vertical for the bottom part. So you had some architectural relief. We saved about $15,000 by just making it all vertical, and we'll just paint it a different color. At one point, it was proposed to have a sewer dump station for like charter buses that have bathrooms on them. We don't own any charter buses with bathrooms on them, so we said, nix that. In the original bid, they had a $160,000 placeholder for purchasing and owning our propane gas station there, but propane companies will actually give you that equipment and install it if you buy the propane from them. So we just looked at all these things that we could look at. We were talking about putting epoxy on the concrete. It makes it easier to clean up. It doesn't stain. It has some slip resistance. Those kind. We removed that. We had radiant heat throughout the buildings. We removed all of that. So all of these project reductions came up to about $676,000 on this project. And most of these things were pre-bid reductions. So as we saw escalation go up, we actually think that these reductions would have been more. So then, what Martell did is they said, wow, here's all these bids. Where did we get off on these? What was the difference? The concrete, there is an additional 230 cubic yards of concrete in this design that put it about $162,000 more than what they thought. They are asking for that structural, they had an $11,000 placeholder for that structural and miscellaneous steel. It's $50,000 more than they thought, and so they're asking them to do that. And as you can see, some of these things are pretty minor, and then some of them are pretty significant. Insulation, I guess, hasn't gone up in price. It actually came in less than what they thought it would, so.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, whew.
One win.
Saved $800. The doors, frames, hardware, so these are just, it's basically, think of these doors with a metal frame on it, came in $26,000 more than what they thought it was going to cost. Glass, they said, you know, their original design budget was light. They had it at about 17.6, it came in at 6, so there's a $33,000 increase. Overhead doors, not too bad. This was one that we thought but they're gonna go out to rebid on that and see if there's anybody else that could, provide that. One of the things that we recognized as we were going through the process is like, well, if it's a school building, it has to have a flagpole. Well, it's gonna cost us about $2,560 for the flagpole, just to supply it. Then we also have some installation costs on that, so there's concrete, excavation, all of those kind of things. The pressure washer system for the wash bay came in cheaper than we thought, so that was good. We engineered metal building. Here's where they landed when they finally put it out to bid on what they thought it would cost. Here was the actual cost. So it was about $220,000 more just for that. The plumbing came in $42,000 less. The electrical came in $250,000 more. When Knife River combined the earthworking utilities, the site concrete, and the asphalt, it actually came in about $25,000 less than what they thought, so that was good. The irrigation of plantings, this one was a shocker to us. Only one company bid. There's only one really commercial landscaper in town. They're currently doing all the landscaping along the walkway downtown, the rail trail. And I'm going to get to why this one is so much more than what we thought, for $33,000. So looking at all of these things, and there were some reductions in the fee, there's a contingency a little bit, but that's where we're getting that $1 million. There's some things in here, the drywall, I didn't cover that. When RDJ did that, they bid it floor to ceiling, but we have places in there where the walls that are gonna be built in there are only going up 8 feet, so they don't have to go the full 14 or 16 feet. So they're gonna rebid that, and so there's gonna be some things that we're gonna do that will happen through Martell's process, and that's why we hired them, to bring some of these costs down. So there's our beautiful building again. I'm gonna quick jump to this. Tom Coburn sent me this morning. So when we originally did the landscaping design for this and had it approved by the city, it was basically kind of covering this area in the front and some plantings and things around the buildings, these brown areas. I don't know if you guys see that very well. But then when I think his name is Chad Pincher, looked at it, and when Northwest Landscaping did it, they did the whole parcel, irrigated and seeded and lawn. And then Morrison Maryland went back to the city and said, whoa, wait a minute, you know, these are retention ponds back here. Our plan was that this area, basically this back half of the lot, was going to be native seed and grass, something that we wouldn't necessarily irrigate. It would just grow tall, we could knock it down, and then every spring it would turn green again, and then by fall it would be brown, just like most of the native grass in Montana. And what they came back and said is that if this green line is the fence line, is that if we stay, whatever's inside the fence line has to be like lawn and irrigated, and this area back here could be natural grass, not have to be irrigated. So we'll rebid the landscaping on this, and see, which we should be able to do.
Mike,
Yes, great.
real quick, so, and we asked them about the plumbing bid that came in, like, it was like, what, $250,000 less than what they thought it was. So they did vet them, they called them back, verified that that was their bid, that they were looking at what, you know, we anticipated they were looking at.
far as everybody else, you know, as the bids came in high or low, they asked the question. It wasn't like we just, oh, so you went, that's a low bid, we're gonna put that in the pocket. So they did go back and do their, due diligence on them. We gave them the opportunity to say, yeah, we made a mistake.
So, as is, we're looking at roughly $1 million more than what we thought, just a few months ago. And just open to the board's feedback, on the project. There are things that we could potentially do, save money now, but, may not save us in the long run. So, for example, if we only need 36 parking spots, why are we paving 50? Right? Can we leave the rest gravel? Those are city decisions for occupancy and when they say a project is completed. So there's a whole permitting process and all these sign-offs from the city. They really control and dictate what a finished project is. And so Denise and I were talking a little bit about what some of the options for completing this would be. One would be building reserve. We don't have a lot of money in building reserve, and we generally try and use that for replacing flooring, replacing a boiler, maybe some siding someday, or, replacing roofs, that general maintenance that we have and upkeep on our building. So wouldn't be my first choice, as a funding source. Obviously, the interlocal agreement, there's still funds in there. There will be more allocated just because of, transportation, permissive levy. And another option would be to look at the permissive levy for transportation. Right now, that permissive levy for transportation, 40% of it is elementary, 60% is high school, and I left it at that 40%, just because, if we're successful in our mill levy, he said we would remain, budget neutral, and I want to honor that, and not unnecessarily increase that. Another option is through the Montana Board of Investments. They have what's called an intercap loan, where they loan, districts and municipalities, funding for this. It has right now it has a 1.55% interest. And it is variable, it changes from year to year, but that's what it is for next year. I had a printout that had, maybe it's Mtsca, what the 10-year average on it was, and I think it was less than 3%. Yep, I found it. Overall average is 3.8%. The average for the past 10 years is 1.95%. So pretty inexpensive loan for $1 million. But what happens in an intercap loan is you have to be able to identify what is that funding source to repay the loan. And that's where we could look at, if we did it for 10 years, and I don't know what terms they would set as far as the duration of it, but you could, pay it out of building reserve or transportation or general fund. You just have to be able to identify that you have a source for repaying. So, I guess, before we come back to Finance Committee in a couple of weeks with a strong recommendation, I just wanted to hear a little bit from the board, overall thoughts on the project. To reduce $1 million at this point, we have to literally remove one of the buildings from the project. It's just one of those things that it's nobody's fault. It's just, this is what is happening in today's construction market. So, open to feedback.
Mike, I know, it's disappointing to see this escalation, but like you said, it's beyond our control. Our district's growing. Our needs haven't changed, and I think we designed this to meet our needs, not just today, but in the future. So it's disappointing, like I said, but it's nice that we have some ways to pay for that extra $1 million. I think we're going forward with it. Value engineer where we can, but also let's not cut things that we're going to need down the road.
Appreciate that, Lance. Other thoughts? Funding source? want Denise just to kind of cobble it together and let you know what it's gonna be?
But my sense is, at least with the funding source, I mean, the project is gonna be another, what, year in the making?
Yeah,
That we will be able to continue to kind of fine tune how we're gonna move it forward. I would assume it'll be somewhere between, a progressive levy is gonna be a part of that equation, I would assume. Whether we do it with the intercap loan and paying it back, but.
yeah, and I agree, and as Denise and I were talking about it today, you know, we wanna be able to move it forward, and one of the things that could potentially hold us up is if the board doesn't approve anything, like additional for it, then we're gonna lose the bids. Not gonna be on schedule, which may not happen anyway, just because, that's just the state of construction in the world right now. But as we were talking about it, one of the things that we thought about presenting was that, you know, if we could identify a true funding source, and it may be, you know, to cover that with that intercap loan, if that was the direction that the board felt comfortable with, we aren't gonna be able to say the exact dollar amount that that loan is going to be for, and what we would probably recommend is, or ask the board to approve, is a recommendation to fund the completion of this project through an intercap loan with that full amount to be determined once, you know, dust is settled on the project. Because, I mean, even with that $250,000 contingency, there's probably some savings, even in that. So if some of those other things we did, we might be down around $700,000, but then there's some things that it's just so hard to predict. And I know, talking with Ryan, he's a little scared, but he's like, I wanna get these people locked in because they will move on to other jobs if we don't.
Mike, I'm in favor, like you, but I will say I'm a little disappointed in Martell and, how they keep, they're a big enough construction company that they, in my mind, a little closer on what this was gonna cost. They're constantly doing construction. To me, when you were talking about the concrete and the portion that they, I'm disappointed in that.
Yeah, the concrete is a combination, and I didn't include it in the reductions, but I don't know if you guys remember the conversation about the, aggregate piers conversation, right? So we had an independent engineer go in and test the soil and said, you know, you really need to put about $500,000 worth of aggregate into the ground, 25 feet deep. And then we said, well, do we really need to do that? And they, well, you know what, you could do a lesser version of it. It's about $250,000 worth of aggregate piers. And then it was kind of like, but you don't have to do that. What you could do is widen the footing on the concrete slab and go a little bit deeper with, you know, removing some of the material and just putting a base in. And so there's a little bit of a trade-off of what the aggregate pier would have cost versus what the additional concrete is. So it wasn't 100% Martell on that in terms of that particular piece, but we just decided we're just gonna call it a wash, in terms of the aggregate piers or the additional. But I don't disagree with you that, you know, for people that are bidding out, projects and jobs all the time, this thing is starting to cost a lot of money. And there is nothing fancy about it at all. I mean, it is a metal building. I'm sure it'll look nice when it's all said and done, but there's not a lot of frills or bells and whistles on it.
I think it's important that you have funding source lined up so that you can keep as possible. So if it's the intercap loan, I'm all in favor of expressing my opinion, but whatever wants to do, I just think we need to keep moving.
So what's the next step then for you, and to bring that back to finance to us to finalize where we wanna get?
Yes, Denise will be presenting that. we talked about. No, but that's the work we're doing behind the scenes, trying to figure that out. We just wanted to kind of put it all out there for the board to understand where the project is, where it was, where it is, and what we need to do to be able to continue to move it. That would be the goal.
Okay.
Next finance committee, come back to the full board for that approval to, I don't know if we're gonna be able to name an amount at that point. We're just gonna have to keep this project moving forward. Here's our best guess and give a funding source. So,
Mike, is anything being held up right now because of the decision?
no. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Micah. Next up, consent agenda district-wide. Are the routine things shuffling around enrollment on Power School, tuition? Anybody comfortable making the motion?
I'd love to make the motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you, Lance. Is there a second?
And I would love to second.
Okay.
Yep, a lot of love. A lot of love.
Been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passed unanimously. Next up, our safe return to schools and continuity of service plan that we address every meeting.
No update.
Okay, and then our work study topic. Oh, you have no
Oh,
COVID update.
a COVID update,
Okay.
I got a little one. Still 0 staff, 0 students, but we did see a slight uptick in the county data. I think there were 32 active cases in Flathead County right now, but as a school district, we are holding steady.
Was the new variant?
What's that?
Is it a new variant of the virus?
I don't know. I've heard that.
Micah, do you know how the other districts are going within the county?
I haven't heard anybody say anything, and I think if there were maybe 1 or 2 cases, either students or staff, it wouldn't be newsworthy between the superintendents, but, I'll ask and just kind of get a feel for it.
Okay, now, work study topic. Denise, you're on.
Kelly's gonna drive for me, and I just want to apologize ahead of time, because my slides are just black and white. They're very simple. And I have to follow them. Okay, so I was asked to cover Budget 101, and 101 tells me, basic. So I am covering basics tonight with you, just to kind of get us ready and geared up for budget. So here's my agenda. It looks like a lot of items, but really I don't, maybe only have 1 slide or 2 on all of these. So you won't be here all night. But I just want to talk about the expenditure budget, which is really where I would like to start in the budget process, and then looking at the different budgeted and non-budgeted funds that we maintain and have to pay for all of our expenditures, and then just some concepts that you need to know. Budget authority versus cash is very important. How we close out the year and what we're looking for in terms of funding for the next year, and then funding sources for our expenditures, and then a quick budget timeline. So it won't be too long in explaining all of this. So, like I said, I would like to start with an expenditure budget, not just, district-wide, but then looking at different departments. So obviously each school within our district, and then departments such as facilities, operation and maintenance, meeting with Greg, looking at what, he thinks he needs for the next year. My friends behind me, with technology, those are big areas, you know, that we really need to, have, pretty good conversations and planning, for the next year in terms of what we need. Food service, another big one, transportation, debt service, some of these things we already know for our expenditures, like debt service, we know what we have to pay on our bonds, we have a bond payment schedule. Those ones are fairly easy. In the salaries, wages, and stipends, and then the benefits, those are the biggest parts of our expenditures. That's probably, I don't know, 85–90% of our expenditures. When we talk about benefits, we're not just talking about insurance, like we talked about earlier, but we're talking about employer contributions, required employer contributions for Social Security and Medicare, and the two retirement plans, PERS and TRS. So we have to budget for all of those things. Contracted services would be the annual audit that we have, any legal services we need to tap into. Curriculum, Callie's already done the heavy lifting on that one. We've got pretty good numbers for that, I think. So just looking at what expenditures are, both overall and then departmentalized. Sarah was here earlier. She and I will probably have a big discussion about special education, what those expenditures are, and then the various funding sources. So start with the expenditure budget. And then I liked this chart because it just, and I'll add to it later, but once we figure that out, you know, we'll know what that is, what our expenditure budget, then we need to look at our funding needs. Let's go to the next one. This part, I just like to make a distinction between budgeted and non-budgeted funds. The budgeted funds are those under state law where the trustees must formally adopt a budget to spend the money. And in those budgeted funds, a common revenue source in all of those are the local property tax levies. And then those are broken out between the ones that are supported by a voted levy, those that we have to go to the voters to obtain their approval to have that levy, and then a lot of them actually are supported by a non-voted levy, which we also refer to as a permissive levy. So contrast that with our non-budgeted funds, which we refer to as our cash funds. There is no budget that's needed to spend the money. Our limit on what we can spend out of those funds are limited to the cash that's available in those funds. Usually don't see any tax revenues associated with these non-budgeted funds. Budget authority versus cash, they are not the same. Your budget authority is your estimate and your, what you approved that we could spend. And again, there's a, statutory requirement that you formally approve an expenditure budget for the fiscal year, and that's July 1st to June 30th. And also in law, the total expenditures made or liabilities incurred during the year have to be within that approved adopted budget. Now, you may have additional expenditure needs, and we'll talk about reserves and things like that. If you have a funding source for additional expenditures beyond that budget that you adopted, we can always do a budget amendment to spend that money, but we just have to kind of watch that budget authority. Cash is the actual amount of cash on hand. And, we have reports that track all this. Those are the monthly reports I just reviewed earlier. Know that with cash, the big thing to remember about cash are two things: that revenue doesn't come in at the same rate as expenditures are going out. This is especially true with our state funding. They have cash flow needs too, so they only give us so much of our state money every month. Because they're waiting for it to come in as well. The other thing is things happen. So unanticipated events mean unanticipated expenditures that you didn't, probably budget for in your expenditure budget. So I'm hoping we can, have a little contingency line item for those types of things, but that's something that goes into building that expenditure budget. This is just a graph that demonstrates the difference between budget and cash. The green line is your budget authority. It starts out at its full capacity in July, and then just slowly dips as money is spent, then your budget authority goes down. Contrast that with cash, that blue line, that represents just your cash balance and how it fluctuates throughout the fiscal year. So the two aren't the same, we have to monitor both. Fund balance is something that I'll be very intent on determining and looking across all funds at the end of the year. So at the end of the fiscal year, we start out with a certain amount of cash. We add our current year revenues, subtract our current year expenditures, and we end up with this ending fund balance. So then what do we do with that? Go to the next slide. In our budgeted funds, we're allowed to keep some of that cash for cash flow purposes, and those are referred to as operating reserves. And then in law, in certain funds, we're limited as to how much we can hold as an operating reserve. If we have any cash fund balance left over after that, then we have to what's called reappropriate to support the next year's budget. And reappropriation usually means that we're going to lower the local levy in the next year. Okay? So we just want to balance that out with all of the needs that we have. So to demonstrate that, it's important that we have operating reserves and the funds that we're allowed to have them in, because again, it makes sure that our cash flow is above zero. So if we have an operating reserve, that's that red line, then you can go to the next slide. That cash balance, as it fluctuates, it prevents us from having cash overdrafts in our account. So it's kind of just having a buffer. Okay, next slide. These are the funds, our budgeted funds, where we are limited as to how much of our ending fund balance we can hold in operating reserves. It's based on the ensuing year's expenditure budget. So when we look at those percentages, those are percentages of whatever budget we adopt for the next year. Okay, so all these calculations have to be made. And it's good to maximize your operating reserves, not only for cash flow purposes, but then we talked about those unanticipated events equal unanticipated expenditures. We would have a little bit of money to tap into for an anticipated event. We have to do a budget amendment and support it with our reserves, but that's just one of the tools we have in our toolkit for emergencies. Okay, next one. This is just a recap of what fund balance reappropriated is. After we're able to set aside operating reserves, then that amount is actually used as a funding source for the next year's budget. And in those funds, that the general fund and that chart I showed you, you have to reappropriate. It's mandatory under the law after our operating reserves are maximized. Next slide. So back to that chart of our expenditure budget, that becomes our funding needs. So if we have any fund balance that we're reappropriating, that becomes a revenue source to help fund those expenditures. So we kind of start there, and then on the next slide, we have to determine how much new revenue we need. And the way we fund that, depending on what fund it is could be local. In budgeted funds, usually local taxes are involved, but then we have state and county sources. We might have some federal sources in the non-budgeted funds. So we'll just look at that a little bit more in the next slide. So what I did was look at, these are all of our budgeted funds, and how they, and what kind of revenue sources we have available to us within each of those funds. So in our general fund, we have a mixture of state and local property taxes and then some other income. Those state acronyms are all the general fund funding elements. Those are all payments that we get in the general fund. So there's direct state aid, quality educator payment. I'll back up. Direct state aid is based on, pretty much on enrollment. Quality educator is based on our certified and administrative staff, and we get paid a component for that. Indian Education for All, Data for Achievement, the at-risk student component, and then that last one is special education allowable cost funding. That's what we get in the general fund from the state. Then we have local property taxes. That's a mixture of the permissive levy, which funds the base budget, and then this voted levy, which we're trying to get passed, and that supports the over-base portion of our general fund budget. We have some tuition revenue that goes into the general fund, in both the general funds, and some interest earnings in all of these funds. In the transportation fund, we get a state and a county reimbursement, and then we have a permissive levy and some interest earnings. I will tell you that the county reimbursement, both in the transportation fund and the retirement fund, are actually raised through property taxes. But they're county-wide property taxes, so the county superintendent calculates that tax, and it's actually on the tax bill as a county tax. But some of it, all of it comes back to not just our school, but all the other schools that run a transportation program within the county. So it's kind of a shared expense, or a shared revenue source. We receive it in as a county source of income. So you can see across these funds, the bonus appreciation, total local. Tuition fund, totally local. Retirement fund, primarily through the countywide levy that comes back to us through a reimbursement and interest earnings. Adult ed is totally local. Technology fund, both elementary and high school get a state technology aid payment. It's not enough. I mean, there's $1 million appropriated for the entire state. And so the AA districts, they mainly get the lion's share of that $1 million because it's based on the general fund base budget. So if you have a bigger budget, you're getting a bigger share of that $1 million. We do have a voted levy in the elementary district, but not one in the high school district. And if we were really, what I'd like to see for funding our technology needs would be an approved voted levy, both in the elementary and the high school. That would solve a lot of not so much problems, but it would help the general funds, I think, because that's where we're kind of picking up our technology expenditures. We could get a technology levy passed, we could free up more money in our general fund.
I tried.
What's that?
I tried.
I know
last
you
year.
tried.
46
You have to
votes.
try again soon in elementary. Debt service is to pay off our bond. We do get now a little bit of state GTD, guaranteed tax-based aid, toward our debt service payments. It was pretty much non-existent for about 8-9 years, just because there wasn't enough state funding to support that payment. I noticed that last year we did receive it, and we actually reserved it as an operating reserve, which we really didn't need to do. So I'll be reappropriating that amount to lower the debt service levy. I'm going to have to in both the elementary and the high school. It's not a lot of money. It's probably a couple of $100,000 between the two funds, but it'll lower the local levy. And then finally, the building reserve. I was visiting with Micah about this earlier. This state, in funding school districts lately, they've wanted to see a local effort combined with what they're giving the school district in terms of state funding. And that's really, evident here in the building reserve fund. So we're allowed to permissively levy, in the building reserve fund, and the state will give us a certain amount of money, and it's based on our taxable value and our A and B. So, we actually get, it's about a 50-50 split between the state and us. So, you know, we can't afford not to levy in that fund in the maximum amount as we can because we're leaving state money on the table. And that's true in both of our building reserve funds. So that's just funding sources from our budgeted funds. We also have funding sources from our non-budgeted funds. And the primary ones are the ones you see here. And there is a mixture, especially in the food service. You see federal, state, and local money. There's not taxes here. There's just, you know, when you're looking at especially your local contributions, they're in the form of fees and charges for services, donations, sponsorships. With the building reserve fund, when you pass a bond issue and sell bonds, the proceeds from the sale of those bonds goes in the building reserve fund to go to your schools, and that's where your bigger money is. Transfers from other funds is the source of the interlocal agreement account. Self-insurance, we looked at, you know, that's primarily premiums. And loans from other funds that we need to pay off. And then student activities, you know, fees, pay-to-play, fundraisers to raise money for that. Food service also gets money from the federal government, a little bit from the state. That school nutrition match is just a one-time payment in June. And then in the miscellaneous programs is where we see our federal grants, our title grants, our IDEA Part B for special education, Carl Perkins for our CTE classes, and then ESSER, of course, is where we're accounting for those. We get state money for CTE. We saw that Medicaid MAC money is going to be supporting that new FTE that Sarah got approved tonight. So just in our non-budgeted funds, those are kind of the sources of, you know, those are ways that those are the revenues that come in. And then lastly, just the timeline, developing these preliminary budgets for the budgeted funds, that's pretty much my job. I want to do it, especially this year. I'm going to have help from people who have been here longer than me, and with all the admin staff. So again, it'd be my technology friends, Greg over there, Sarah, you know, Micah.
He wants to increase his budget.
He's my friend too. But, and then our assistant superintendent, I'd like that to be a collaborative effort, actually year in and year out. We'll start doing that. I think we can actually we could look at expenditures now, but we'll know more about our funding sources after the levy election. That will really help. So between then and the end of the year, we'll be developing those budgets. At the end of the fiscal year, we're going to balance and close out fiscal year 22 and then look at those ending fund balances. And that's where, you know, we look and see what they are. Maybe we can recode expenditures somewhere else. There's a little bit of shifting of that just to make sure that we're maximizing our reserves, you know, that kind of thing. So that's something that takes place in July, and then I would expect to put a preliminary budget for all the budgeted funds in front of the Finance Committee in late July, early August. And the reason I go into early August is because we don't know our taxable value until August 1st. That's when the Department of Revenue is required by law to provide it to us. And that's an important number because that drives our bills. So we really can't move forward without that number in place. And then adoption of the final budget by the board has to be done by law on or before August 20th. And then you can talk about it for about 5 days, but you have to make a final decision by the 25th of August. And that's kind of all I've got for Budget 101.
Denise, quick question. I know last year we were not able to do an unanticipated enrollment increase. It seems like with 13% growth here in Kalispell last year, 5% student population growth, that would be something we would want to consider. Is the legislature gonna allow that?
Well, that's a good question, and it kind of goes hand in hand with my comment about the state expecting the local district to put a lot of that expense before they'll kick in their share. And, so what they've done with respect to unanticipated enrollment increases is that they've suspended the law that we've all been accustomed to, and that is we just apply to the state for the additional funding in the general fund. Instead, they replaced it by, we don't have to meet those thresholds. So we do get, a recalculation of our budget, and it's compared to the one we adopted. So they calculate the increase, but then they said that school district, you have to spend a certain portion of your ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds, 10% of it, which is a pretty high number for us. And then if there's any of that increase left over after you funded it with your own ESSER funds, then we'll use the state ESSER funds to give you any additional money. Now, we did have enrollment increases in both the elementary and the high school. In the elementary, we have to use our own ESSER funds to support that increase. But at the high school level, we get, I think, about $180,000, I think, between two separate state pots of money.
It was 175.
Was it 175? And so I think we've already received most of that money. Oh, I know what they did. They gave us some of it, and we have put it in the miscellaneous program, so we have that now. But then the other, they're going to load into e-grants, and we have to access it that way. So there's a lot of hoops to jump through to get to that money. So that's true for this year and next year. I'm hoping that we go back to the old system after that, but we'll have to see what they do at the legislative level.
Maybe that's something we can talk to the Montana School Board, so.
Maybe we have.
And really push that in growing communities, it's a concern.
Yeah. And that it has been part of the conversation.
But we've demonstrated great flexibility in our hoop jumping ability.
That's right. Oh, yeah, we can do it.
Thank you, Denise. Every time I hear Budget 101, I learn something new. You know, I mean, you can definitely tell that the funding was developed by committee because it seems to be, you know, a little bit pasted here, a little bit brought on there. But yeah, something new sinks in every time. So thank you. Any other questions for Denise? Okay.
That was the, I almost understood.
That's 101.
Okay, public comment. I do not, is there any public comment? Okay, I'm going to give the spiel today. We're looking at upcoming meetings, and dates. Please take a look at these, the committee meetings. I noticed IT committee was canceled for tomorrow, for Thursday. Are we having a school tour here tomorrow morning? I have that on my calendar. Which is kind of a different day for it,
Yes,
a Wednesday.
9:30 on
Okay.
Wednesday.
Here.
Yep.
Okay, so I hope.
Caught me off guard there for a second.
Well, I know, we don't usually do them on Wednesdays. Put up this morning for it.
On the meetings, not sure if we need one for policy, first reading on a variety of them. Okay, That's also election day.
Oh, it sure is.
Denise is gonna lead the policy meeting.
So we'll just reschedule that one for June.
Maybe election watching party in the basement.
I'll be there.
Like last.
Later, though, later. As we get closer, about midnight, I'll go down.
Bring some popcorn.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll have a gallery set up.
Okay, it is 8:15 by my clock. Is there a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Lance. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Heather. Moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any adjourned?